This morning, as we continue through our stewardship season, we have a video to share with you about our Neighbors Food Pantry, which is one of the key ways that we serve our neighbors in community. And so I invite you to watch and learn more about this important ministry. Thank you.
It used to be that food pantries served a need that was once a month, like to help kind of bridge people. But now food pantries are not a bridge anymore. They're the entire road that we're doing. Our guests come not just once a month. 60% or more are coming every week. So Neighbors Pantry kind of grew out of a lot of our other food ministries that have existed here at Anaheim United Methodist Church. We went from just a pre-packed box and sending people on their way to doing grocery rescue and adding that in, and then adding additional fresh foods and things like that to the menu. So from doing maybe 10 households a week to now doing 700 households a week. We operate by appointment. When folks get here, they kind of line up behind whatever the hour. So an hour, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 9:45, whatever. It used to be that we lined chairs up all out here, all the way down and then through there and then into the actual building as well, into our fellowship hall. But now with this, we don't really need that. So it's definitely decreased our manpower that we need to set up and break down.
One of the reasons I joined this church was it fit my value system of being a reconciling church. We have lots of unhoused that we serve. We have lots of partnerships in the community, and that was just a church I wanted to be involved in.
One of our other probably lessons learned is allowing people to have, or providing wagons for folks, that folks can go through the line, gather their food, and take it to their car. We also place boxes in there as well so that they can just take it and go. Anytime where we've done just purely bags, it slows things down. It's hard for people to juggle.
All the volunteers, they see you don't come in, they call you and say, hey, you need something, or you okay? There's like a really family.
Somebody used to come, bring his auntie, his grandmother, and a couple of their neighbors, and they were all had mobility issues. And so he was tasked with bringing them every week. And I was like, seems really unnecessary, and I worried about them falling and having issues like that. So then that was kind of where we bore out the issue of like allowing people to sign up for others and for us to be able to pick up, or for them to be able to pick up food for them. At the end of our line here is also where our unhoused guests come each week to pick up food. These are pre-packed bags, and then we do a toiletry bag as well. We don't have a restriction on how many times someone can come if they're unhoused. I think we just decided that if someone's hungry, they're hungry.
Oh, well, I'm Julia, and I make sure that the unhoused have lunches. So I'm here from 10 to 1. Somebody is here 4 days a week. Everybody gets a sandwich, which I can heat, and breakfast sandwiches are a favorite. Some fruit, some snack stuff, and especially in this weather, water.
We made a partnership with Street Medicine. They are a part of Cal Optima. They serve our unhoused community, so they will help not only get them a doctor's appointment or get them to doctor's appointments. They'll help them sign up for health care. They'll also take them to appointments. Then they also will do some of the other ancillary things, like they've worked to get folks housed. So Steve and his team have been able in the last few months, probably in the last 6 months, to get 5 of our unhoused folks into permanent housing. And they've gotten about 20 of them into temporary shelter as well. And then they've also gotten, I think, 5 of them into rehab. So they've been able to do a lot of really awesome things.
The need in Anaheim is really growing, and our need is just climbing every week. We see that.
We are so grateful for this important ministry in our midst. Will you join with me in prayer? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We are in the second week of our sermon series that is reflecting on our vision for good here at Anaheim UMC. And this week, we will move beyond naming our vision to considering what fuels the kind of vision that makes a positive difference in the world. So our vision statement, remember, is to reach out, serve, and invite with the love of Jesus Christ. And a lot of that vision is outward focused, isn't it? And I love that orientation of the heart toward others. It's a pouring out of love and hospitality and care. And I think that's why many of us are gathered together here, because God's love inspires us to live with love for our neighbors. And we want to be a community of faith and a part of a community of faith that helps us serve in those ways that we couldn't accomplish or sustain all on our own. Now, when I think about our vision statement, an image that comes to my mind is one of a full cup of water or a pitcher that is pouring out the good that we long to see in the world. And I think that's a really good thing. And at the same time, I recognize that we as human beings, we can only pour out so much. And eventually, our individual cup, or our pitcher, so to speak, gets empty. And so the question that comes to my mind is, how do we refill our cup? How does that happen? How do we refuel so that the good things that God is calling us to do as individuals and as a community can continue to happen? Well, here's something that I deeply believe. I believe that when God calls us to do something, God also equips us to do it. So in other words, the fuel, the refilling, that is only possible with God's help. We humans, we get to say yes to God's call. We get to practice good stewardship of our time and our talents and our treasure. But God is the one who takes the few loaves and fishes that we bring and is able to feed the multitudes. So the Bible story that we are focused on today, that we heard read just a little while ago, takes place around the table where Jesus had his Last Supper with his disciples. And unique in the Gospel of John is this story that is told about Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Now, washing the feet of guests was a really important practice in days when people didn't have socks to wear. They didn't have closed-toed shoes. They wore sandals, and they walked all over the place on dirt roads. And so typically, there would be servants who would perform this task of foot washing. But Jesus, after this meal with some of his closest friends, he is the one who performs this humble, intimate act for them. And he does it even though he is their rabbi and their teacher. He is their leader and their Messiah. His act of kneeling down to wash their feet would be stunning in and of itself. But I have always been moved by how the gospel writer describes just what is at stake for Jesus in that moment. And the gospel reflects on what motivates Jesus to demonstrate this kind of shocking love and care for his disciples. It says, before the festival of Passover, Jesus knew that his time had come to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them fully. And so the gospel is telling us that Jesus knew that he was going to die, that he was going to suffer in the days ahead. Jesus also knew that God's presence and power were not limited to that moment of relative calm that he was sharing in the meal with his fellow disciples. He knew that God was going to be with him every step of his life and his death and his resurrection. And so with that knowledge, Jesus is filled with a kind of peace that allowed him to get up from the table, tie a towel around his waist, and become that emblematic servant leader that we picture as he washes his disciples' feet. In that moment that was tense for him, he is able to see the stress that they may have been enduring as well, and he selflessly cares for them, body, mind, and spirit. Now, Jesus washes every one of his disciples' feet, even the one who he knows will betray him, even the one who will deny him in just a little while, and those who will desert him. It's no wonder that when he gets to Peter's feet, Peter pushes back and says, "No, you will never wash my feet." But in the end, Jesus does, in fact, wash his feet too, because Peter longs to be connected to Jesus, even though he doesn't understand why Jesus is doing what he's doing. Jesus says back to Peter, "Unless I wash you, you won't have a place with me." And so then Simon Peter responds, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." Peter always seems to have some trouble with his timing and his gauging of his enthusiasm. Maybe that's relatable to some of us. I think Peter's example is a reminder to look to Jesus for our cues as we move through life, to pace ourselves sometimes, and to be open to taking risks at other times, and to know which situation is the one for which we have to keep attentive to Jesus. And I think that kind of attentiveness is each part of fueling our faith and following Christ and what faithfulness can look like. There's a global activist and former development director associated with the Hunger Project. Her name is Lynn Twist, and she spent many years working for organizations seeking to end world hunger. And she describes a time when she met a woman named Gertrude. She was in a church basement in Harlem, and she says, "It was from Gertrude, a woman most people would call relatively poor, that I learned some of the most powerful lessons I ever learned about money. It was from Gertrude that I learned that money is like water." She talks about this interaction. She says Gertrude introduces herself after Lynn has given a talk to the gathered group in that church basement. Gertrude says she doesn't have a checkbook, she doesn't have credit cards, but then she goes on to say, "To me, money is a lot like water. For some folks, it rushes through their lives like a raging river. Money comes through my life like a little trickle. But I want to pass it on in a way that does the most good for the most folks. I see that as my right and my responsibility. It also is my joy." And so after saying that, she comes down the aisle. She brings $50. It's a bunch of small bills to make up that amount, and she gives it to Lynn Twist. She gives her a hug, and she goes back to her seat. And as she's doing that, a bunch of other people start to get up, and they come down the aisle to do the same thing with small bills of their own. And Lynn starts to tear up as she watches this movement happen. At one point, she can't hold things anymore that people are handing her, so she has to grab her briefcase and make an impromptu offering basket on the table. And she says, "There was this feeling of a ceremony. There was a sense of integrity and heart. The amount of money that we received, maybe $500 at the most, was more precious to me than any I'd ever seen before. I also realized that Gertrude's $50 felt more valuable to me and ultimately would do more to end hunger than," and she remembers there's a check for like $50,000 at the bottom of that same briefcase that she's turned into this offering plate. And she realizes Gertrude's gift will do more because of the heart with which it was given than that other check that was worth more in quantity. She said, "I received from Gertrude a gift that carried her commitment to make a difference, the stamp of her soul. And as I accepted the money, I felt inspired, by her and renewed by her expression of integrity and purpose. So sure, that story is about money, but it's not really about money. It's about movement and motivation. It's about fueling and sustaining the good. Even the speaker herself, Lynn, she feels renewed in her call to do good in the world because of her interaction with Gertrude. Now, looking back at our Bible story, Jesus doesn't just leave his disciples to guess about why he has washed their feet. As soon as he's done, it says he put his robe on, he returns to the table, and he says to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you speak correctly because I am. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too must wash each other's feet. I have given you an example. Just as I have done to you, you also must do." Now, we don't always associate the word generosity with anything other than money, but I think this story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet is the epitome of a generous act. Jesus humbles himself. His spirit, his love, his actions are generous. And that generosity has a purpose. It has an impact on the people around him. It inspires his disciples to do what Jesus himself has done. He's calling and equipping his followers to be servant leaders also, to do good in the world rather than hoard good or power or profit for themselves. Generosity makes impact possible. Generosity of spirit and of humility and of our time and our talents and our treasure, all of it. Generosity makes impact possible. Mark Laberton used to be the president of Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, and he writes about a complex issue that he needed to resolve with the IRS. He shares the story. He says, "After several months of correspondence and legal advice, the day finally came to begin talks in person. Those who knew the IRS suggested it would take many months, probably longer, to get this all settled. And so he talks about going to the IRS office in Oakland and how he waits and he waits. Finally, he's brought into like the bowels of the building, all these cubicles. I imagine no windows, but I'm not sure. And then he says, alone in that large IRS office without hope. I think that captures it. And then he talks about there's an agent who comes, they talk about his case, they fill out the paperwork, and then she excuses herself to go and consult with others. And he waits 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes. Nobody comes to tell him what's going on. He thinks this person has just disappeared. But suddenly, the agent was back, and he writes, "She handed me a sheet and said simply, 'There, it's all done, it's settled.' I honestly did not know what she meant. I assumed that she was saying that the first step had been taken. What she meant was the whole process was settled. She turned the paper over and revealed the 9 signatures that she had acquired all the way up the IRS ladder, so the case was now closed and closed in my favor." And then he reflects on what that meant to him. There in the midst of a warren of bureaucratic anonymity and powerlessness, I encountered a person who had become my advocate, who heard my appeal and who took the initiative to do on my behalf what I could have never done on my own behalf. She met me at a moment of isolation and fear and sent me out with resolution when I had anticipated nothing but delay. For me, this has become a parable of what the body of Christ can be in the world. We are to be those who, in the vastness of the universe and in the context of human powerlessness, show up as advocates who represent and incarnate the presence of God, who is the hope of the world. Jesus knelt down and he washed his disciples' feet. He took care of them in a moment of their isolation and fear. And he was able to do that because he knew that he came from God and was returning to God. So he was able to extend care and compassion and to teach by example, so that in the future, when his disciples encountered challenges and hardships and fear and isolation, they would have that example to follow. You know, we human beings, we can only pour out, we can only give for so long. And then if we're relying on our own power to do that, we burn out. Jesus shows us and teaches us and embodies for us what we need in order to be filled anew. We need to experience the care of God. We need to practice the compassion of Jesus. So this morning, my friends, on this World Communion Sunday, followers of Jesus all over the world are celebrating the sacrament of eating the bread together and sharing the cup. And so I invite you to imagine not only familiar faces around this table, not only the culture or cultures that you are most familiar with, not only the languages that you know or the liturgy that we are familiar with, but imagine and know that Jesus lovingly prepares this table for all of us. Because of who Jesus is, our cup can be refilled and can be overflowing. And because Jesus says that he is the bread of life that we break, that he is the cup of blessing that we drink, we are made into one body, the church. Jesus feeds us and fills us and fuels and sustains us physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. And the feast is prepared so that we might do the good that God longs to see in the world. May it be so. Amen.